Blessed be the Lord God Almighty. Welcome to Antioch Center for the Nations. It is a joy to be in the presence of God and to be able to share His Word. And I'm going to go right into our message and put the title of it up, which is Managing Apprehension. This is about facing the future, facing change, things that stand against us. The most common thing that the Bible tells us is what we find in this introductory passage. So do not fear, Isaiah 41:10. For I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. We all face moments in life of apprehension or fears, challenges, especially when we're confronted with something that we don't know about, what we call the unknown, when we're challenged with new things or provoked with bad news or whatever the case. Sometimes we wake up and we get a bad phone call or a bad email or something, and it causes apprehension, it causes concern. When we're moving into a new phase, sometimes unfamiliar territory, we also have these uncomfortable feelings. And that's what this message is about. But the fact is, it is simply a part of our life. It's what we go through. To help someone through this, we can coach them. That's really what I've been studying, what life coaching is all about, is just finding people who are apprehensive about something. And therefore they feel an angst or they feel a worry. So what they want to do is have some help or not. Some reach out for help, some do not. But I like when people come and have issues. And I meet total strangers all the time that they don't know. I don't know why they're drawn to me. Well, I know it's because of God, but I was in a place the other day at the end of a class I was going to when I finished. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, which is I'm learning to scuba dive. And after that class, this man that was not there in the class whatsoever came up to me, immediately started talking to me and said, I have a problem. Like, who walks up to a stranger and the first thing out of their mouth is, I have a problem? And he started sharing with me about an issue, and I coached him. Just like this method that we call the Oscar method that I use. I Oscared him right there on the spot, and had to make it short because there was a group of people who wanted to meet me and talk to me there. So I did it, gave him a number, and he had some real issues. He was apprehensive about how to do something, and he could not figure out how to do it, but he knew he had to do it. And that's pretty much what causes these feelings in us. And life coaching is important. And the methods, in fact, of the system I learned are specifically designed to decrease your apprehension. And I'm going to talk about that a little in this message, but the Bible actually gives us everything that we need about this subject, and it is full of powerful examples of great leaders who also struggled with fear and uncertainty, or these feelings of apprehension. Yet in each of these cases where we read in the Bible where people experience this, God met them in their apprehension, met them in their issue, and solved it, whether they got rid of the apprehension or not. In other words, the problem that caused the apprehension will always be solved by God. God's going to take care of it. So the issue is, why do we hold on to the worry, the fear, and the apprehension? So that has to be managed, and that's why I created this message, and this is what the Lord spoke to me about. God meets the people. All these stories in the Bible where people have these issues, God meets them and helps them through. Some of them remain apprehensive. So ultimately, we learn from the front of this message, I can tell you the whole anecdotal response of the message is simply this: don't be apprehensive, because everything's going to be okay. God's going to work it all out. So why worry? But it's not that simple, is it? Not that simple. Because I know it's not that simple for me, and often I have to deal with issues of my concerns. And so I come up with this message, kind of help us through that. And it will explore how the stories of some of these people can teach us some things. So we're going to divide the message up into two different sections, one of which will be 3 biblical examples of apprehension. And these are stories in the Bible that we can relate to, that people went through things that are difficult. And the second phase of this message will be 5 steps to face the future with courage and faith. Or in other words, overcome these feelings of apprehension. So we're going to begin with the first one, which is Moses. Number 1, Moses' reluctance to lead. Exodus 3 through 4 and verse 11, I compile it here together. It says, "So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, 'Moses, Moses,' and Moses said, 'Here I am.' And down in verse 11, it says, 'But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?'" Now, we don't have to go through the entirety of the story because you know this story very well. Moses was in a deep place of apprehension or fear when it came to what God was calling him to do. So God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, but he felt unqualified. He felt and expressed fear about his inadequacy. Who am I that you would call me to do this? I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't speak well. He came up with many excuses, of course, to try to get out of it, but God, one by one, dealt with those and helped lead him through this difficult moment. I don't think in the execution of everything God told him to do that Moses was ever completely comfortable. So it has more to do with leaning on him, but Moses initially, in fact, asked God to send someone else in his place. That's how he dealt with it. It's because these feelings, when we face a new phase, an endeavor or a stage of life that is unknown to us or intimidating, it's because it seems beyond us, then we experience feelings of apprehension, like Moses in this story. And this is common, and we all go through it. I'm sure all of you have a time you remember. Something new. Maybe you're working a job for a while and you've been in the same position for a long time, then suddenly they want to move you to a new position or a new place, and all the expertise and experience that you have acquired in the past now has very little bearing on this. It's like starting all over again. Nobody wants change. Nobody wants to be challenged, but it is part. So we go through these feelings of worry, concern, apprehension about it. And Moses is going through that. In fact, that's what he says to God in Exodus 4:10. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue." So this is one of the many excuses that he was giving. So his fear stemmed from what? Focusing on his personal limitations rather than God's promises. And it comes down to this in most of the stories in the Bible. When people become focused on themselves and not dependent upon the Lord, they will have feelings of fear, inadequacy, of difficulties moving forward because they are apprehensive about it. So his apprehension, Moses, was irrational because it discarded the assurance that God would be with him. And that's the thing that God always promises us, is that don't fear, I'm going to be with you. I got you. I'm there with you. I'll be with you in the fire and through the flood. He gives us all these promises, but we struggle with accepting those. I've often stated that God does not call us to do things that are easy or even possible for us in our current condition and state. It's true. I've never got nothing that God has called me to do, and I felt his impulse to say, do this thing, has been something that I felt comfortable about. Recently I preached about coming out of the comfort zone, when God calls you out of that space where you're at ease. That's what it was like for me to move from Mexico to India, and from India to Singapore, and then go into Indonesia. Every phase of my ministry, every phase of my life, there are moments of apprehension because of what Moses is going through, and I identify with this entirely. And so he is continually trying to expand us and grow us into another version of ourselves to better suit his kingdom. We are his workmanship, fashioned for the purposes of the kingdom, but it's difficult for him sometimes to work with us because we become fearful or apprehensive. So he's now in a kind of an arguing match with Moses, and every excuse Moses is throwing at him, he's stopping it and saying, okay, then this, then don't speak. Let Aaron, your brother, speak. and so and so. He learned how to do this to Moses. He did it to many people in the Bible, and his answer basically always comes down to, don't worry about it, I'm there with you. You're not going to do it, I'm going to do it for you. And I've seen this happen again and again in my life. Often God will challenge me to do things that I do not feel I can do, and my first instinct, like Moses, is to list and mention all the things that I'm missing. I take account of my weaknesses. Immediately I turn to my problems and list the problems. I am problem focused. When I spoke in a conference about solution focused, I said for the longest time in my life, I had a method that I called, they call the method SF, solution focused. I said I had PF, that was my system, problem focused. Whenever something, oh man, how am I going to do this? Because, and then I list a bunch of things that will stop me from being able to do it. I don't have this, I don't have that. And that's exactly what Moses is doing here, and other people in the Bible do. But I called this problem focus for me early on through years, and when I started learning more about the way God thinks, I realized that God never focuses on the problems. He only focuses on solutions. His response is never problematic, it's always solving the problem. He's a solution God. Everything he does, he's a way maker, we just sang it, a miracle worker. He's a light in the darkness, and he will always be that if we trust him. And Moses is learning it here. Because if we're focused on the problems, we're less likely to move forward because we use them as an excuse to not do what God is telling us to do, or what will cause us to expand. God just wants to grow us. His original commandment to us was be fruitful and multiply. So he wants prosperity and growth. He doesn't want stagnation. He doesn't want you to just stay the same forever and ever. He wants you to constantly grow and learn. And he's trying here to expand Moses, trying to call David, young David, out to become greater as a king. He's trying to call different people in the New Testament, in the Old Testament. Throughout the Bible, it's many stories of people being called to do something that they never would have believed that they could do. And that's what Moses is going through. So that's one big category of the apprehension we have. We just feel inadequate. We feel incapable. I know for me, before I decided to be a missionary, I had a long list of reasons why I could not. When the first impulses came that I should go to the nations, I thought it was ridiculous because of how poor I was, because of how uneducated I was. I knew that ministers, people who are missionaries that go out to the nations, they're usually educated, and they have certain degrees, they have certain abilities, and I don't have that. And those that do have that, they had to buy it, they had to pay money for it, their families had money. My family was not even present. I had no money, no ability. And so when God started dealing with me about becoming a missionary, I of course said, no, it's not possible. Choose someone else, choose anyone else. And of course, God did not let go of me. He kept coming after me. And so he comes up, I had a long list of these reasons, but one by one, God showed me that he was with me, and all those things he would help me with, and he did. One by one, whatever my issues were, he fixed it. My ignorance was no excuse. My fears were no excuse. He did not accept these as reasons why I should not obey. Even my unwillingness, I did not want to, my unwillingness was not excusable to God. God just kept coming after me. And if you are in communication with him, he can do this. It's a big key. He will remove the reasons like he did for Moses, but this is an issue. Sometimes people are so apprehensive, they stop talking to God about whatever the future is, whatever the plan is that God has for them. They just don't want to talk about it. Maybe they're even afraid to go to church again because they're afraid at church somebody is going to ask what God is telling them. So they start to run away from the voice of God. It says the voice of the Lord came to Jonah and told him to go to the Ninevites, right? And so how did he deal with that? He did not want to do that, so he ignored the voice and he ran in the opposite direction. But God has tools to bring us back. And he found me and eventually brought me to do what he called me to do. Gideon, I love the story of Gideon. He's one that really had apprehension about obeying God. His doubts about delivering Israel. In Judges 6:12 it says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." So here, the angel of the Lord came, speaking to Gideon in the threshing floor. It was a shallow space, low, where they would put wheat so that the wind would blow over it and not in it. It was a wine press that when you would thresh in a threshing floor or a wine press would often, they use the same space, and you just throw the wheat in the air so the wind, the breeze would take away the chaff and the bits of grass and only the seeds would fall down. And so you could do that in the road, but Gideon was living in an environment where if you do it in the road, the forces, the Amalekites, or the forces of people that had taken over the land, they would come and take his harvest. So he had to hide in the wine press to do it secretly. Look left, right, throw it in the air. Look left, right. So in the middle of doing it, that's when God came to him. In his fear, in his apprehension because of the enemy, hiding out in that place, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," is the word that came to him in that space. And he didn't identify with that. So in verse 13, "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Why is the enemy been alive? If you're with us, why is the enemy here? Why have we been ransacked? And why am I hiding? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." He goes on to say, "The Lord turned to him and said, 'Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand.' Am I not sending you?" he said. Now Gideon goes on again, making excuses. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down the Midianites, leaving none alive." So when God calls Gideon here to lead the Israelites against the Midianites, he is filled with this apprehension. And he points to the facts. That's a problem. Apprehension comes from a few sources which we'll look at later, and one of them is visible things, what we see. If you see naturally, apprehension will always follow you. Fear will always be a part of your life. If you look at the natural surrounding and make choices by which you see, then you will always be apprehensive about your future and what God is doing for you. And that's why it says we walk by faith, not by sight. Because if we look with our eyes, we see only the natural. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But Gideon here is making all these excuses. His emotional and spiritual apprehension hindered him from initially embracing God's plan. And so he is full of fear, and it's causing him to ask for signs. It goes on from there, and he says, okay, as God keeps saying, no, it's by me, I'm with you, I will do it. And he says, okay, if it is, I need a sign. You need to show me something. And that was involving the fleece and the dew, whether on the grass or the fleece. And God did it, and the next day he reversed it to say, I'm here. And finally, Gideon reluctantly, still with apprehension, went. In Judges 6:17, it says, Gideon replied, if now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it's really you talking to me. And I know people who do this, a lot of people that look for signs all the time. And I think seeking a sign is an indication of apprehension. That you're already suffering from the dilemma of apprehension. You're afraid, either A, you don't want to do it because you're trying to get out of it, so you're looking for a sign. That's what happened to me when God told me to go to India. I just shared that story in our last service. I told God to deal with my apprehension or to manifest my apprehension. I said, well, I would need a miracle. You need to give me $5,000. And of course, God can make dew show up on a fleece or on the grass or give you $5,000. It's an easy thing for him. And I repented. I don't ask for signs anymore because he taught me how to listen and obey. Pray, stay in communication with him. And if he tells me to do something, just go ahead and do it. Gideon's learning this. And Gideon's fear demonstrates how irrational apprehension can be when we are consumed by feelings of our weakness. So we have to get our eyes on the Lord. So in all these cases in the Bible where men experienced apprehension, moving into a new phase or an obedience to the call of God, their biggest problem was not yet trusting God. In every issue, apprehension is also a sign of us not trusting. We just don't trust. If I said, hey, try one of these candies, and I had a brown paper bag and I offer it to you, if you trust me, what will you do? You will reach your hand in that bag, grab a candy, pop it in your mouth. If you don't trust me, what will you do? You'll say, well, what's in the bag? You start coming up with fearful responses to a gesture. I'm trying to give you a treat. It's wonderful. Oh, yeah? And you will even go over and look in the bag and scared. You think it's a trap or something because you don't trust me. And maybe you have reasons not to trust me as a stranger or something. But if we're in close communication with God, if his children are interacting with him, if we as earthly parents, Jesus said, know how to give good gifts to our children, God has no plans to hurt us. So our apprehension is more about us making excuses, more about us being lazy, more about us trying not to have to be responsible to God. And I know it is in my case. And throughout the Bible we see men of God, women of God going through this. This is really, it's always the case for us. We have these issues. We look at the natural and our limitations in spite of the promises that God always gives by relative or by relating not to God's strength but to our own strength. All these things are also what cause our apprehension. And like it says in Romans 8:28, he says he works all things together for the good of those that obey him, that love him and listen to that call. They respond and obey it. That means whatever the thing is we see, like Gideon was trained to look around and he basically, hey, why are we in this predicament? I can see the enemy. They're constantly here. Then why? He said, well, but I'm going to be with you. I'm telling you it's going to be okay. And he wrestled with it, but eventually he obeyed. This is the apprehension of the 10 spying out the land is a big indication of what apprehension will bring us into. It will cause us to postpone the purposes of God or, in fact, remove us from the plan of God and somebody else will take our place. So we got to deal with it. And I've often tried to use lack or inability that causes comprehension as a reason why I cannot do things. God called me to be a pilot. I still don't know exactly why, but it was supernatural. I never thought about being a pilot. I never saw myself as someone that could become an aviator. And I was in Acapulco going to our second church building. It was at that time I had planted 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 or 6 churches. And this is the second building that we acquired for these 2 main churches. We had consolidated some of the groups back. And I had a key, and I put a key in the door. And when I put the key in the door, God says, I'm going to give you a key that's going to open doors in your future. And as I turned the key, he said, I'm going to make you a pilot. And I giggled because that is the craziest notion. No way I can be a pilot. You have to be a special person to be a pilot. That was my thinking, right? And I am not a special person. So I opened the door and I went in and it wouldn't go away. And I said, okay, God, if you want me, I did that same stupid mistake I did with the $5,000. I said, okay, God, if you want me to be a pilot, then somebody is going to have to give me money to do it. And sure enough, a woman by the name in the U.S., she contacted me. Actually, I was there visiting, and she said, God said, I need to pay for you to do some kind of training. I said, I know what it is. He wants me to be a pilot. She said, what does it cost? And I told her everything it would cost for me to be a pilot, and she wrote 1 check for it all. And so then I went in scared to death. I was so scared on the first check flight, like the first flight, getting in the plane, that I was passing out. I was shivering, passing out. I was so fearful of that. But I went up in the plane, and I came down, and I was so sick. I had air sickness like you would not believe. I felt like I thank God I didn't vomit in the plane because it's a very small plane they train you in. It would have been very messy. But I didn't, and then I got back, and I decided in that first flight that I took, nah, can't do this. I'm not going to, obviously God made a mistake. And I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be a pilot. I made the decision based upon my apprehension about my dizziness, and I had a lot of things that naturally would stop me from being a pilot. And yet I sat down, and the Lord came to me and comforted me. And then the instructor came back in and sat down, and he says, so what do you think? Because it was kind of like the first flight was a test to see if you would move on. He says, so what do you think? And I said, I don't think it's for me. I feel, I got so sick up there in the air. And he says, yeah, we all do. He says, I'll tell you what your problem is. You didn't eat anything before you came. And I said, yeah, I didn't eat because I was afraid to get sick. He says, yeah, that's why you got sick. So what? He says, yeah, pilots know this. You don't know. I'm going to tell you. Next time, eat a big bowl of oatmeal. Eat something thick and heavy that sits in the center and that gives you a gravity base. You feel a weight and it causes your equilibrium to balance. I said, okay. He said, come on, let's do it another day. And next time he did it, and sure enough, he was right. It was fine. And then from there, they couldn't get me out of the plane. I got my full license after 3 months. I got it really fast. Usually it takes a couple of years that people go through it. I would land after a lesson, execute it perfectly, because I grew in confidence and the Lord helped me. I would land, and then the instructor would say, okay, well then when do you want to go next? And I said, well, we're still in the plane. Can we just go straight into the next lesson? And the instructor I had was from Amsterdam, this young guy named Willem van Bornigen was his name. Super cool dude. He's like, yeah, I'm not doing anything. Let's go. We go up again. And these are hours I was logging. That's what you have to do, is acquire all the hours. But I finished in record time. And now I was so apprehensive about the knowledge part. I was scared to death. Studied. But as you know, I'm not scholastic. I was 3 years in 8th grade, dropped out in 9th. This is the first studying I had done like that outside of mission study and language study. But this was like a lot of math and a lot of equations and formulas and navigational skills and pilotage and dead reckoning and barometric readings, and like a lot of math I had to learn. The book was that thick, I had to memorize it. It was crazy. Hours and hours and hours. I went and took the exam, and I knew there's no way I can pass this. I went with a bad attitude. I just prayed and asked God for help. I took the exam, came back, and I was disappointed because I got one of the answers wrong. So when my grade come back, it was like a 90 something, 90 whatever. And I come back to the instructor sad. He says, how you do the exam? And I showed Willem my results, and he went, what? And at first I thought he was mad at me. And he said, nobody does this. He says, you can pass this exam with 69%. He said, this exam's made for idiots that they give such a curve. He says, wait, and he checked statistically. He said, you are in the top 1% of pilots that have taken that test in the United States of America. The top crossing, and I thought, yes. Because I knew it was God helping me do it. But everything in aviation, I was so apprehensive. You say, why don't you fly anymore? I said, because it's the tool, and somehow it's going to be used, and I don't know where, but I still wait. I have the tool. I have my license. I can get back active in just about 5 hours. Just about 5 hours. I can do it in 1 day and just do my check routing, and all the knowledge is there. I still think and know how to do it. I knew I'd have to brush up on some of the new laws, but I could do it because one day, I don't know where, how, or when, but it's going to come into usefulness. Could maybe even hear from Singapore. Maybe I can have a plane and fly my own plane all over Indonesia. That would be great. And all over Malaysia or wherever I have to go. But God knows if you obey. And you know the story of Gideon ends with him obeying. I was like that with exercise. Right now with diving. Now becoming a scuba diver. I was so scared to take the water test. Like this Tuesday I went and did the scuba training, and I was afraid, but I paid very close attention. I'd already studied a lot, and I did really, really good. I was surprised at how good I did. And the instructor was like, you got this, man. You're great. You're fantastic. Every exercise, I nailed it right away. The scariest things are having your mask ripped off and your oxygen pulled out your mouth, and you can't go up, because if you, in a simulation, if you're too deep, you can't dart up, you can die. So can you find your things? Like you do a back arm sweep and it brings the hose of your respirator back so you can grab it, but your mask is gone so you can't see. You have to do it by feel, put it in your mouth, start breathing again, and then find your mask, and then take the mask and orient it properly, and it's full of water, and that's where most people freak out, right? Because you have to keep breathing and blow with your nose, and it pushes the water out of the mask. It's mask recovery. And one of the poor people in our group quit because of that, because she couldn't do it. And she decided she can't do it. I felt sad for her. But I was apprehensive about it, but God was with me. Everything worked out, because naturally I do choke that way. And I don't know why I didn't. I should have, but I didn't. Totally perfect, because God was with me. Same with life coaching. I thought I'm too stupid to be a life coach. And I went into the program and they all said, gosh, you could teach this. Yay! Which, by the way, I am going to do. And I want to teach everybody that. We're going to start a 40-hour series pretty soon. I hope you want to be a part of it. Teach you the entire solution-focused method. And then we can even move to credentialing if you wanted to become credentialed as a life coach. Amen? How many would be interested in that? Anybody online? Because we can also do it online. It can be done through Zoom or some other effect of that. Number 3, Elijah's fear after Jezebel's threat. Now, this has a lot to do with what we hear. Apprehension also, some of the roots of apprehension are what we hear. And he heard words. It says Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, it says. And while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. Now, that's about as apprehensive as you can get. We shared about this in dealing with fear some time back. And this was right after a great victory over the prophets of Baal. Elijah's confidence was shaken by what Jezebel said. Not to his face. This was gossip, technically. Technically, people heard Jezebel say what she said, and it got back to Elijah's ears, and what he heard caused him to move to another stage that causes apprehension that we need to be careful about. And no matter what he had done, mentally and spiritually exhausted, here he is under the tree asking God to take his life, and it showed where he was. And that's what God's question was there. He says, it's not in there, I didn't include it, but in 1 Kings 19:9 it says, and the word of the Lord came to him later, what are you doing here, Elijah? So the Lord came to him to bring him out of his fear and his apprehension and get him past that. But he caused him to flee from his purpose. Now, this is something about these 3 different categories. Apprehension, and I liken it to anticipation. So apprehension versus anticipation. Look at these 2. Apprehension, often our fear of the unknown is irrational. It exaggerates dangers, magnifies our weakness, and ignores the presence of God in our situation. That's what apprehension causes. If you allow that feeling to take over, it is a form of doubt, but if you allow apprehension to govern you, then you will yield to fear and insecurity, and because it takes those fears and those insecurities and magnifies them to you to convince you to disobey what God's calling you to do. Whereas anticipation, the wisdom of anticipation is rooted in faith and hope. It recognizes that while the future is uncertain, God is already there. Anticipation trusts that God's plans are for our good, and we can move forward with courage, knowing He will guide us through every unknown. And so we have to learn how to exchange apprehension with anticipation. Apprehension says, oh no, I can't. Anticipation is, I don't know how this is going to work, but it's going to work. Everything's going to be okay. And that's making decisions God's way. When I teach on the voice of God, there's the 2 lists. The list of the scribe and the list of Jesus. When Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and that word soul sunesis. It means just joyous acceptance. It's your emotions. And then it says with your mind, that's the one where it says to meditate on it warmly and think about it. But you first make the decision with your will out of your soul. And when you do that, later, I don't know how, but I'm going to get through this because you are having anticipation. So you're either one or the other. You're either going to be apprehensive or you're going to have anticipation. Anticipation is not negative at all. It is positive. So it's a good outlook as you move forward, whatever the next stage is. So consider the sources of apprehension. Words spoken. This is what we hear. In other words, people will say things and they will cause you, like we saw with Elijah, fear. You're afraid because of what you heard. Visible obstacles. The enemy in the land, like Gideon. It's what we see. Sometimes what you see will make you afraid. What you see, you will make decisions. And this is all because of the worst source, overthinking. This is what we imagine. We overthink. Apprehension can be afraid that a house is haunted because the floor creaked while you were sleeping. There's nothing there but a creaky floor. But your thoughts, your imagination about it starts to drive you into a realm of apprehension and fear that can cause you to be immobilized. I learned this when I was a little boy. I was half asleep, and outside my window there was a tree, and the wind was blowing, and it kept doing like this, and when it did, one of the tips of the branch was rubbing on the window pane, and it sounded like somebody scratching on the window pane. Now that was a fact, but I was halfway in and out of sleep, and as a little boy, it triggered my imagination in the dream state. And it was a witch outside the window scratching with her fingernails with these red, evil eyes. And I'll never forget, I was so afraid, sweating with fear. I pulled the covers over my head, and the wind blew all night, so that witch just kept scratching at my window, wanting to come in. But I hid under those covers until literally, I did not sleep all night. I was sick from fear. And I got up, and finally my mother came and said, "Where are you?" And I said, and I pulled the cover down. The sun was just coming up, and I got up, and I didn't tell her about it. But then I walked over to the window apprehensively, and I opened it, and I saw that branch sitting there, and I could see a mark on the glass where the branch was scratching all night. I learned a valuable lesson as a child, just that don't let your mind do that. That's why the Bible says we take captive every thought. We have to take hold of that. We think things, we overthink things, I say. So we see what we see. Well, it must be this. No, it's not necessarily. Don't jump to conclusions. Just listen to God. All this can be remedied by just staying in touch with God through His Word and through prayer. Amen? So now we're going to finish up with these things. 5 steps to face the future with courage and faith. And that's the anecdotal responses. We're still going to move forward. We're still going to grow, whether we have apprehension or not, but we're not going to obey it. We're going to switch to anticipation. And we start this by, number 1, just remembering God's past faithfulness. Deuteronomy 7:9 says, "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping His covenant of love to 1,000 generations." And Lamentations 3:22 says, "Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness," we tell Him. So we think about this. When facing the unknown, and there's a temptation to be apprehensive, recall how God has been faithful in the past. Reflecting on His unchanging nature helps us face new challenges with confidence. If He got me through, and that's actually what I used doing the dive training. I thought, I become a pilot, and this is not as hard as piloting. So if I did that, so God got me through that, I can do this. And I am very confident, and I'm looking forward. I'm actually going to the Philippines to do the open ocean. I still have a little apprehension about depth. because I only trained in like 3 meters of water, but this is going to be, 15, 20 meters, 18 meters at least. And I'm a little apprehensive about clearing your airspaces because you have to keep adjusting as you go down. And scared of, when you're down there, you can't panic. That's the biggest thing. You have to ascend slowly. But I have some things that help eradicate that by my training. I understand. I faced those same things. I remember when my pilot instructor took the air. What I was afraid of, they had this exercise called recovering your airplane from an unusual attitude, which means they take the plane. You have to put foggles on there, called these goggles that stop you from seeing. They take the plane, they bring it up into a cloud, they turn it on an angle, and it's like going up, which means it's going to stall if you don't change it quickly. And all you do is hear, and you're waiting. You can't touch anything. You just hear the plane struggling, and you feel the motion. But because of centrifugal force in an airplane, you don't know what's up or down. If you're in a cloud, if the plane is arcing, then gravity seems like it's that way. And that's what the instructors do. They say, okay, you're in an unusual attitude, recover. And immediately you do it by looking at the instruments. You cannot look outside because you're in a cloud, so you can't see anything. You can't see the ground. You can't see the sky. You just need to use just your instruments. And I was deathly afraid of doing that exercise, scared to death of it. But I did it because I remembered I can do this if I just stay calm, remember that God is always with me. And so the Lord was with me right there in that cockpit, got me through it. In the ocean, I'm sure it'll be the same way. So, and I deal with this by asking this question. Whenever I'm apprehensive, I ask this simple question. When did God not come through in my life? I try to remember the times that God let me down and did not work everything out for me. And there's not even one time. I desperately try. I can kind of conjure up a couple of moments that I didn't get what I wanted and pouted. But technically, it was God doing what God wanted to do to bring me to my future. So it worked out. He always is faithful. Always. Great is your faithfulness. His mercies are new every morning. He's taking care. His compassions are there for us. So do I ever remember a time when God called to move me forward and then left me and abandoned me? No, never. He's always there for me. Number 2, trust in God's sovereignty over the future. This means that He's in charge of everything. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. And Jeremiah 29, 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not harm you. Plans to give you hope in a future. So we embrace the unknown by trusting that God's ways are higher than our ways, and He's going to work it out. We don't need to understand it. His peace passes our understanding, it says. We just need to trust. Just put our life, and every issue with apprehension in the Bible was a result of not trusting God. And as soon as people learned to trust God, it was fine. David trusted God more than anyone. Doesn't mean he didn't experience apprehension and fear at times, being what he went through, but he's the one person that in the Bible we see really trusted God and just went with the flow. No matter what, he went with the flow. It brought him to a very dark space, but he knew that the Lord was with him, and he wrote many, many beautiful songs about it. That's called the Psalms. Go read all the ones he wrote about God through the darkest spaces, through the greatest fears, but the Lord was always with me and did this and did that, and it's important that we keep that in mind. Trust in God's sovereignty over the future. Number 3, this is important. Be present in today's opportunities. Matthew 6:34 says, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. In Psalm 118:24, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. So day by day, I like the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. God likes us to focus on the now so that the future can come to pass. He only wants you to do what must be done now. Don't try to see the biggest picture all the time. Day by day, trust Him. Focusing on today helps alleviate the fear of the future. And when we concentrate on what God has placed in front of us right now, we're better prepared for tomorrow. And taking one day at a time, not being apprehensive about the outcome is important. If we just think, okay, there are a million things I have to do, but so what? Don't think about that. The things undone are worthless. Think about what must be done right now and do it incrementally. Even 1% change is positive. 0.5%. And then if it's day by day, fine. That means within 100 days and just like 4 months, you are 100% through what you need to do. If you only do 1% a day, I always think of it that way. So just focus on, be present in the moment, what you can do right now. And that is a good way, day by day, understanding what God's bringing you through. That helps you get past apprehension. Number 4, pray for God's strength and courage. Philippians 4:6, one of my favorite verses. That's why I always mention it. Do not be anxious about anything. Don't be apprehensive about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So when apprehension rises, prayer invites God to eradicate it, to bring peace into your heart. You say that I don't understand what's going on, but that's why it says that it passes, it transcends understanding. You don't need to understand it. Just lean on the Lord. And that's what another verse says. It says, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. This is the one we read in introduction. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So we have to be focused. Actually, we must make a concerted effort to make the choice to not fear, but trust. And that's why the Bible is filled with verses that say, do not fear. Do not fear. Fear not. Fear not. Fear not, because we jump to the fear before we jump to the trust. But it is a test so that we can decide. And we need help with this. We need a community. And that's really the 5th and final one that I say here is surround yourself with encouraging community. So cool today. Like, I'll go back to my diving. A little apprehensive about it. A little afraid today. And now I need to get my mask today and my little booties that you put on your feet so your flippers won't hurt you. And so I had to get that and a snorkel. And I don't know which one to get. I mean, I kind of looked into it, and I'm just going to go and just see what happens. I was afraid to even go to the dive store. And as I'm on my way there, a friend of mine messaged me and said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to the dive shop to get my mask. And he said, which one? I told him, he said, I'll be there before you get there. And my friend David from the UK, he's a dive master. He was there, already questioning the staff about he already assessed. I walked in there and he says, this is the one you need. This is what you want. Look, this because this and because of this and that. And wow, it made it so easy. And then we're talking, he says, how did the training go in the pool? I said, it went great. But what I'm really apprehensive about, I told him about the 20 things. He says, that's a very thorough course you're in. That's great. And I told him I'm a little apprehensive about the deeper realms. And he said, no way. He says, you got this. You're going to do great. Like very encouraging. So what is that? I have a community of people. And I found out from him that the guy who's taking me to the Philippines to dive in open ocean was an instructor. He was a dive instructor with 5 different diving organizations for decades. This guy's he's a master diver. And that's the one taking me, is going to be there with me. So, wow, community, whatever you're going through. If you're going to be a missionary and you're stepping out of the mission field, man, I'm your friend. I'm your buddy. I will be there to help you. We did that with Joe and Leisha, and when they were preparing, every fear they had, I was like, no, don't worry about it. It's like this, like that, the other. So community helps. Hebrews 10:24 says, and let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, but encouraging one another. And another verse in Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Because that denotes the fact that sometimes in the community you will be corrected. You will be told that what you're thinking is wrong. It means your community in some way or another, in that community, it's okay for someone to rebuke you every now and then, especially when you're rampantly going off into apprehension and fear. I'll never forget one time here in Singapore, this was years ago, I was moving house. I was going to move from our apartment, one of our apartments in Woodlands, and I was moving to another place, and that moving, any new thing is a possible source of apprehension. And I was freaked out, scared, worried, and he was there visiting, this is a pastor from the U.S., and we were sitting in my living room, and I'm just only talking the negative, this, that, the other, and I don't know if I'm going to get this, if I can, I don't know if the movers haven't gotten back with me, this, that, the other. And he just looked at me and said, man, look, wait, Stephen, calm down, man. Just calm down. I predict that everything is going to work perfect, and you will move to that new house, and God will take care of everything. Something about him forcefully telling me, though, really encouraged me. And I laughed, and I said, you're right. Like he, as a fellow believer, drove apprehension out of me by rebuking me. Like, you're just being fearful, man, grow up. It was kind of like because he was older than me, it was like an older brother telling me, stop being a baby. And it worked. He got me through it. And we need that. We need to be in a community where iron sharpens iron. And so we sharpen each other. And we do that. The church is a good place to be when you're going through issues. Amen? So this is what we saw, managing apprehension, 3 biblical examples. We saw Moses, Gideon, and Elijah, and what they went through, all based upon the ideas of the sources of what you see, what you hear, and then what you imagine, your own brain. Turn those things off. Don't you walk by faith, not by sight. Don't listen to the people's stupid words. Even about diving, people, you're doing what? Diving, you can die down there. Like every person's like, that's dangerous, and you're putting your life in jeopardy, and are you sure you want to do that? It's like, don't talk to those people. Talk to the people who dive all the time. It's like, it's really no big deal. Worst case, you do ABC 1, 2, 3. Well, what if my air runs out? Well, that's why we have this secondary air to each of your buddies swim with you. Have another line. And that's part of our training. They take your air away, and you have to do the sign to someone else that you can't breathe, and then they give you an okay, and you give them an okay, and they come over and take their secondary respirator and give it to you, and you start breathing again. And you have to go through that, and it's good to be in a community of people that know what they're doing, and don't worry about it. Don't listen. Don't listen. Worst thing is the news. Don't listen to the news. Gosh, it's all a bunch of lies anyway. They'll make you the weather, the climate, all that stuff they're making. So much apprehension about climate change and everything that's going on. Don't just trust God. Listen to God. 5 steps we saw facing the future. Remember God's past faithfulness to you. Trust in God's sovereignty over the future. He's the one that wrote the book. Be present in today's opportunities. Just do step by step. Pray for God's strength and courage, and surround yourself with encouraging community. Amen? Well, that's it for the message. Why don't we stand to our feet? I pray it's been a blessing to you, and that you could